Hello, Emily here from Homemade Emily Jane, here to kick off the Stratus Quilt Sew Along. Welcome to the Sew Along. I am so excited to have you joining me over the next 4 weeks as we make Stratus quilts together. Be sure to check out the link in the description below for the whole schedule of the Sew Along, but we'll go over a quick overview right now. So we're on week 1 right now. Week 1 is all about making sure that you have the pattern and the fabrics that you need to make this quilt. So in a little bit, I'll cover all of those details. But as we move through the Sew Along, we're gonna actually spend 4 weeks making this quilt top. So week 2, we will be cutting out our fabrics. Week 3, we will be piecing our wonky strips together and then trimming those into blocks. And then the 4th and final week, we'll be adding our sashing and sewing our blocks together to make our quilt top. After that, you'll then decide when you want to quilt it and bind it at your own leisure. So we've got 4 weeks to sew together and I am so excited. Week 1 starts today and it is all about making sure that you have the pattern and that you pick out your fabrics. You can grab the pattern in my shop, either a paper pattern like this one or a digital download that you can download immediately as a PDF. Alternatively, I also do have some quilt kits available, which is a really easy way to get the pattern and the fabric all in one. The quilt kits that I have make the quilt that are on the cover of the pattern this beautiful blue ombre Stratus quilt. One really awesome thing that I love about this pattern is that it is scrap friendly. I actually designed this pattern to use up scraps. So if you have scraps in your stash laying around, this is perfect to use them up. Also, you can use fat quarters or 1/3 yard cuts. So scraps, fat quarters, or 1/3 yard cuts, all are perfect. You could also use a jelly roll, a 2.5 inch strip roll of fabric. So any of those are perfect for use in the Stratus quilt pattern. I received a few questions regarding scraps and how you use them. So I will say any scraps will work as long as they are at least 2 inches wide and 10.5 inches long. So that's the size of scrap that you need to work for the Stratus quilt. I am going to cover the fabric requirements for you today, but before I do, I would love to show you what's inside the quilt kit, especially for those of you that ordered the quilt kit and are sewing along with me to make the Stratus quilt. If you ordered the Stratus quilt kit or you're going to, it'll come in a bubble mailer from USPS, and it will have all of these beautiful blue fabrics in here. So the way it's packaged, it'll be in the bubble mailer like this. You will have your first 13 fabrics will range from light to dark, and these 13 fabrics are all 1/3 yard cuts, and they are used for the quilt top piecing the wonky strips. So you'll have 13 1/3 yard cuts. Additionally, you'll have 2 extra pieces of fabric. This extra blue fabric, you'll notice, is a 1/2 yard, and that is used for binding on your Stratus quilt. And then the big chunk of white is for background for the sashing and the borders. So that is what comes in the quilt kit, along with the paper pattern for Stratus. So I do still have some Stratus quilt kits available. So if you want to make a blue ombre Stratus quilt, just like the one that's on the pattern cover, head to my shop. It's linked in the description below, and grab your own quilt kit to get started. So let's go over the fabric requirements for anyone not using the quilt kit. So you'll see on the front of the pattern, you see the beautiful quilt. On the back of the paper pattern, I have fabric requirements written out, and I'll share them for you here. So regardless of what size you make, you can use fat quarters. The ombre layout design is recommended for the baby throw and queen size. You can try ombre for the mini size, but it might not look as ombre-like as it would in a bigger quilt. That's just how it works out. But the mini size, if you're choosing to make a mini Stratus quilt and you're using fat quarters, you'll just use 2 colors and it'll be a 2-color wonky strip alternating design, or you can use scraps, and I definitely recommend using scraps because I think that is so much fun. But you'll see here all of the fabric requirements that you need for the sashing and the borders, which is like the background. For the improv blocks, using either 1/3 yard cuts or fat quarters, and then the information that you need for the binding and the backing. As you're picking out your fabrics, I want to encourage you to mix different fabrics together, especially if you're using scraps. I know a lot of my samples use all solids or all blenders, but you can mix solids, blenders, and prints all in one quilt, and I really love the way one of my pattern testers did that. Check out this beautiful quilt made by Stephanie from October in the Wild. She made a baby size using scraps, and I think they turned out so beautiful together. What do you think? Also, even if you have all one shade or one color family of fabric and you're gonna make it monochromatic, you don't have to do ombre if you don't want to. A few different samples of the quilts that I've made and that my pattern testers have made have been monochromatic, but have been in a scrappy scattered layout, which is really fun to do too. So have freedom of choice as you're choosing your fabrics. Even if you want to go with one color family, you don't have to make it ombre if you don't want to. This quilt pattern is so fun to make regardless of what size you're making, and I would love to hear what size you're planning on making, so drop a comment below. I am personally going to make the throw size, and I'm going to make it ombre just so I can show you how to do it. So that brings me to my next question for you. I need your help deciding what fabrics to use. I have narrowed it down to 2 different selections. The first one will be ombre from this light yellow all the way to this burnt orange. So a nice little firecracker fabric bundle. These are a mix of fat quarters that I had in my stash. They actually used to be stored in here, so you'll notice I'm missing a chunk of yellow from my fabric decor because I might want to make a quilt with it. So here they are. It's a mix of solids and blenders. So these blenders, a lot of them are Michael Miller fabrics. The solids are primarily from Connecting Threads. So a fun little mix of color here. So let me know if you like firecracker. The other option that I have pulled together as a possibility is jungle. So these greens are all solids, primarily from Riley Blake. I think I added one extra green in here to help round it out, but I have tons of different shades of green that I think would make a really fun ombre. So let me know if you think jungle or firecracker would be better for me to make during the sew along. If you aren't sure what color scheme you want to do, I definitely recommend checking out the coloring pages that I have available. You can download the coloring pages for free on my website, homadeemilyjane.com/coloring-pages. I'll drop a link in the description below for you to go find the Stratus Quilt coloring pages, and you can go ahead and print that out and color it with crayons or colored pencils. Or what I like to do is actually use a coloring app. I use an app called Recolor on my phone. I will screenshot a picture of the coloring pages and then upload it into the Recolor app. From there, I can color it all different colors and then decide which color scheme I want to go with. So let me show you a couple of the options that I made while I was just playing around with this pattern that you might like to use as inspiration for your own quilt. So first off, I've got some ombre ideas, some greens, some yellows. You might notice that this might have been my inspiration for the fabrics that I picked out as possibilities for the sew along. You could also make a baby size using pink ombre all the way to purple. What I did for this one was I did the darker colors at the corners and then got lighter towards the middle, and that's where I switched from pink to purple. You could also do a whole rainbow. It doesn't have to be just one color to another color or light to dark, monochromatic. You can mix it up and add a bunch of colors in like this rainbow baby quilt. I would love to make one just like this at some point in time. I don't know if I'll get to it, but if you're inspired by it, I hope you try it out. And then I've also got some other mock-ups made. You can check them out right here. I hope that gives you some information and some inspiration for picking out your fabrics for your Stratus quilt. Now you know the fabric requirements. You hopefully picked some scraps out of your stash or picked out a color scheme to go with. And now the next thing I want to talk about are the prizes. One of my favorite things about hosting a sew along is that I get to give away lots of prizes. So each week throughout this sew along, we will have at least one prize, sometimes a couple prizes to give away. And those prizes will include fat quarter bundles, batting, quilt kits, and even long arm quilting services. So be sure to check out the prizes as I send them out in the weekly emails. The way to win the prizes, you don't want to miss this. You have to be on Instagram. Unfortunately, that's just the easiest way for me to pick a winner out of the people that participate each week. So each week you'll post a photo to Instagram of your progress made during that week, and you'll want to make sure to use hashtag Stratus SAL. That stands for Stratus Sew Along. So now that we've covered how to get the pattern, how to choose your fabrics, how to enter and win prizes, I also want to share with you a couple of my favorite tools that I use for this quilt. Because this is the first week of the sew along, you don't need them right now, but they might be helpful later on. And if you like to online shop like I do, it might be helpful to order the tools this week so that you have them in time for cutting and piecing later on. So first off, my absolute favorite tool that I use on nearly every quilt that I make is Best Press. Best Press is a spray starch alternative that I spray as I'm prepping the fabrics. So I will spread my fabric out on my ironing board, spray it with Best Press, and then iron it to dry it. And that makes it a little bit more crisp, but not quite as crisp as starch. So if you don't currently use anything to prep your fabric, you might consider using Best Press as you're making the Stratus Quilt. The Stratus Quilt does involve sewing on the bias a little bit because of the wonky strips. So having Best Press on your fabrics helps eliminate the stretch that happens with bias sewing. One of my favorite tools for cutting out this quilt is my Stripology XL ruler, and I will talk more about this next week as we're cutting the fabrics. But if you don't already have a Stripology, getting one is super beneficial for nearly any quilt, but especially this quilt. So check out the link in the description below if you want to check it out or maybe find out more about it. And finally, the third tool that I really recommend that you have on hand before next week is a rotary cutter with a fresh blade. So make sure that before we start cutting this quilt, you change out the blade. I like to change out my rotary blade every couple of weeks because I quilt quite a bit, and using a nice sharp blade just helps in every aspect of cutting. So those are the tools that I would recommend that you get before we start next week. All right, friends, I think that covers everything for week 1 of the Stratus Quilt Sew Along. Be sure to leave a comment to let me know which bundle you think I should use as we go through this sew along. I left a poll asking for opinions on these 2 bundles over on my Instagram channel, and unfortunately it's a tie. So hopefully we can break the tie and decide which fabrics I should start cutting into next week. So right now, just decide which type of quilt you're making, whether it be scrappy scattered or ombre design, and pick out your fabrics. Once you've picked out your fabrics, be sure to share them on Instagram for a chance to win prizes, and I'll see you back here next week.